What's up, everybody? We are back. John Arroz here, the leading Hispanic voice in science fiction, with another Epic Collection review. Very excited to start plowing through some Epic Collections again after a little bit of a kind of break from some indie stuff. But here we go. Here comes Daredevil, the Man Without Fear. Volume 4, The Woman Called Widow. Now this covers Daredevil's 64 through 86, and Iron Man 35 and 36, in which Daredevil crosses over with Iron Man. There's one of the early crossovers between books, and we will get into it shortly. Now, what's neat is Gene Colan did almost all of the art in this. There's a pinup by Bill Everett, and there's the Iron Man issues, of course, where others did it. So you get a very consistent art style. And Gene Colan actually does pretty art. I would say his storytelling ability on the panel is not to the level of like Jack Kirby or Steve Ditko, but who is? Yeah, but he still just draws a very solid panel. And we start off with the Stuntmaster, who is one of Daredevil's old nemeses, coming back. Roy Thomas writes this originally. And Matt Murdock goes off to L.A. to visit Karen Page. Look at this panel. This is where Gene Colan really excels. Those are some pretty girls. And that's what... That's probably helps with the sales there. And that's Karen Page and her roommate, as Karen Page is in Hollywood trying to start a new life away from Matt Murdock because she literally can't even that he's Daredevil. So, like I said, the storytelling really, I mean, you just get pretty standard stuff with Gene Colan. I mean, he is just your workhorse here. The Stuntmaster gets caught up in a thing. He's gone clean at this point. But he gets caught up and ends up almost killing Daredevil. And then they get this guy on the set called Brimstone. We get in a weird kind of mystery here that Roy Thomas gives us. Who inks this? There's some heavy shading on the inks here on this one, which is pretty Sid Shores, who I've not heard of before. If you look, lots of very heavy shading along this. And it adds to that sort of like mystery detective feel. In this, which is Daredevil's kind of hunting down who is this guy and what's he doing on the set. And it concludes in the La Brea tar pits. Now, this is a silly little device, and Marvel does this from time to time, especially in these early 70s issues, which is, what do you think of as an LA tourist in the early 70s? La Brea tar pits is one of them, and so. We get a character sinking into the tar pits, which is kind of silly. But it's cute. So all this stuff, like, I'd say the feel of this has that, like, Adam West campy style to it. Even though a little less than normal compared to, like, Batman in this era, as I believe it is. But at the same time, you still got that. It's campy. The stories are a little cheesy. I'd say the relationship drama between Karen and Matt are the most interesting parts to this. As is normal, this is a beautiful drawing of Karen again, and that's what we get as she kind of shuns him from L.A. here, and the Stuntmaster's back this time with Stiltman out in L.A. Oh boy! And after that, Matt goes back to New York. I guess Sid Shores inks all of this. You see his heavy inking and shadow lines all over everything, which I kind of like. I think it adds a cool feel to it. And this one, he actually deals with a boxer, tying back into his origin. Good stuff. We get a Life on the Line where they're fighting this street gang called the Thunderbolts, and Black Panther's involved in this because he is. And then I believe that is the last Roy Thomas issue here. And all this went along very swimmingly. You have kind of like a street fighting Matt Murdock. You get some weird supervillains, of course, but he's mostly a street fighter and a crime solver and all that. And then it gets into really funky stuff. And Gary Friedrich wrote this one. And it really starts to change. There's a lot more talking, for one. You got a weird politician who's like talking about America in a cowboy hat. And there's this, like, the Tribune character who's like just a silly character. God bless America. And he's just going to judge people for being commies, basically. And it's very eye-rolly. Oh, I guess Roy Thomas does come back. But he's finishing off Gary Friedrich plot. Maybe Roy Thomas is biting off a little more than he could chew at this point. He's on almost every book for a very long time. And we have the Tribune resolution here before we go to the next thing. And now Gary Conway takes over. And I got to say, or Jerry Conway? Is it Jerry Conway? I think it's Jerry. Sorry. But Roy Thomas's run was very nice up until that Tribune point where he's finishing off that other guy's story. He obviously hands off the book here. And then it goes to a level of cheeseball that, like, it really is rough. And you get Tagak, the Leopard Man. And Daredevil gets thrown into this, and it turns out Tagak's actually this interdimensional traveler. And I'd say it gets wacky. So if you like wacky, you might enjoy this. But over the top, a lot of coincidental things happen in these stories at this point that, is just stuff that really was not well thought out. Let's put it that way. But then we get a crossover with Iron Man, which I guess Conway's writing Iron Man at the time too. And this is a pretty neat storyline. Basically, Nick Fury is captured by these strange beings. Daredevil gets mixed up in it. Iron Man's mixed up in it. It crosses back over to Daredevil. And Daredevil escapes and leaves. And we actually leave in the middle of the Iron Man issue here. So since Daredevil just kind of goes away at this point, we don't really finish the story. But he is involved in that, and it is a crossover with Daredevil 73. So we do get that in here. Probably better in the context of Iron Man. And now the silliness happens. Everybody goes blind in this issue of Daredevil. And of course, Daredevil, being the only person used to being blind, is the only person who can stop this. And then then Daredevil shows up in like this South America country where there's this El Condor revolutionary. And just problems are rising where, he's pushing and killing the people in the American embassy and things like that. Daredevil's out because it's like a favor to Foggy. I mean, it was a really thin reason for him to be there. Doesn't really fit the Daredevil type of storytelling. And this just doesn't work out very well. And like I said, Gene Colan's just got, pretty generic action going on. Nothing really exciting. I mean, he draws very nice figures and very nice backgrounds and good draftsmen. But there's nothing really to like get you in terms of the art. And then the storytelling is just a little scattered and haphazard at this point. Now, again, Conway is writing Spider-Man at this point also. And yes, you can tell there's a different inker here. So you see that the shading has a very different characteristic to it with a lot more little dottings and a little more subtlety to it. I actually like the other inker a little bit better because I think it adds a little more, feel to it. And this gets into a little campier of a look, even though it's the same. Is this the same artist? This doesn't look like Gene. Oh, I guess it is. I guess it's the inker changing things up quite a bit. But Namor shows up in the middle of this. Spider-Man's in the middle of this. They have a knockdown, drag-out fight. It's just... And, of course, this all continues in Namor or whatnot. And, again, just another storyline that's not really working out. I had a lot of trouble getting through this Conway stuff right in here. And I was dreading this. There's not much personal element to it. I'd say Roy Thomas really dialed up that Karen conflict a lot so that you had a lot going on with Foggy. Or a lot going on with Karen and Matt, which you cared about, even though they were in LA and away from their general setup. Not as much here. You get a few, you get them thinking about Karen, but like not much happens in it. There's a Foggy plotline building through this where he's getting blackmailed as DA at this point. And he fights this Man-Bull character. And a lot of these issues at this point have 2-issue arcs. So you kind of set up the villain in one and then conclude it in the next one is how it goes. And, it's... Friedrich took over again as for this one. And, yeah, we got Tom Palmer doing the inks again, which I don't think his inks look as good. They're just not as crisp and as sharp on Gene Colan's art here, and you see it kind of deletes itself. It's interesting. When you have different inkers on the same artist throughout the entire book, you really can tell the difference between inkers and how much they actually add and change the concepts of this and just the feel of everything compared to to others. And I really enjoyed the beginning of this a lot more than I enjoy this part. The owl returns at this point, and Daredevil is, I guess, excited to fight him. Takes him down. There's a crash. Is he dead? And it concludes in this one. And here's where it picks back up again. So I really like all that Conway stuff is eminently forgettable until about issue 80, which leads into this, which is where it really starts to pick back up again. And Conway does an amazing thing, which is introduce the Black Widow into this Daredevil storyline. And what it does is adds a new dynamic and really freshens the book and brings it back to life again. So I loved the Roy Thomas stuff, even though it was campy, it was fun. Really had trouble with the middle there. And then we get into this. It's very interesting. Now, this issue 81 is in the Black Widow Epic Collection Volume 1 also, which I read a while back, but it reads so much better in the context of Daredevil than it does in the context of that Black Widow omnibus, because you get all the plot threads that are going on here. Conway has a weird way of introducing her. She rescues him, and then he runs away, and he was unconscious, and she ends up thinking he just didn't like being rescued by a woman and was embarrassed by that. Again, I don't like the inking done here. You can kind of see in this panel how it just adds a weird characteristic to Karen's face here. Actually, really weird here. It just doesn't work out quite as well as those old ink levels. It's this whole page. Oh well. And so the plot line doesn't quite work out here because it's just a little too contrived with what happens. But the Black Widow dynamic and her interest in Karen's interest in another man and all this is happening adds a personal element where it is interesting to watch and interesting to read a little bit. Here we get a nice pinup by Bill Everett, legendary artist. And then we get into this. So Black Widow's fighting with Daredevil at this point on his team, and there's some mysterious villain sending him after, or sending people after him, and he's kind of manipulating everything. He calls himself R. Stein in the background. We don't know who he is. And again, the inking not quite the best. But this is where the Widow storyline gets interesting. I at least start to care about it and care about the characters again, which is what matters. Of course, he defeats the Scorpion. Black Widow is then accused of murdering the Scorpion. And we get a different artist, Alan Weiss, as a fill-in on this one, with Bill Everett inking. And Alan Weiss actually doesn't draw faces or figures quite as well as Gene Colan, even though the inking's really nice and tight with Bill Everett on this one. But Black Widow forces to turn herself in, and we start to get a little cheesecake from Conway. This wasn't in the first couple issues, but we get a lot of Black Widow changing in these, and I think he wants to sell things. You get Karen Page in this like strange shirt that is completely undone in the middle, and that starts to build into here a little bit. Now, it turns out Mr. Hyde was involved in that, and then we get involved with this Stein guy, and here's where Conway's writing doesn't quite work that well for me again. We have this big buildup of who is this guy? He's important, the Stein guy, and he's working for somebody else. And so when it started, he was a mysterious figure somebody else was working for, and then now he's talking to a mysterious figure on a screen who he's working for, and it's just like he's repeating the same concepts too much within a tight period. And number two, the reveal of this guy being the assassin is pretty lame, because the assassin one is a lame name. Who's not an assassin in these books? But it's just not somebody who matters or in the context of Daredevil, so it just doesn't work out very well whatsoever. And we get Sid Shores back on the inks here, so I like the art again better. We are back. Our guys had a break, and here we go. This is kind of an odd panel, the way it just kind of didn't work out. An experimental panel, I guess, where they're both thinking together. But Black Widow calls Daredevil out to Switzerland, and they get involved in this mystery with the assassin, it turns out he is. And we find out that he's really some extra-dimensional traveler who's trying to change history. And interesting idea of a character. Then other extra-dimensional travelers bring him back and say, enjoy your life. We're sorry about that. Sorry about that. He shouldn't have done this. And that's kind of it. Weird Deus Ex Machina at the end. And that's why I said it doesn't really work. I mean, it is nice to get the widow relationship going, and this is good on that level. And it was fun. The pacing's fun of it. But just there's really the payoff of like the mysteries involved with this were just really a letdown, is what it comes down to. So now we have 2 issues left in this volume, and it gets weirder from here and more contrived from here. So I'm glad to have Gene Colan with Sid Shores back. I think it looks pretty. And this entire issue takes place on an airplane where they're fighting people kind of trying to take over an airplane. And suddenly someone shows up in his villain costume and threatens to kill everybody. And it's the Gladiator, who was from a few issues back. Lots of it in Volume 3. And then Matt lands the plane. They get back. He's off with Widow. And coincidentally, tons of coincidentalities in these Conway stories. Karen sees him at the airport and kisses him, and Black Widow's all sad face. So we get a little bit of relationship drama, but it is too contrived again, is what it comes down to. And then we get the return of the Ox, who in theory died a long time ago. And we get back to Tom Palmer inks, who I don't like as much. But Tom Palmer does something interesting, and Gene Colan does something interesting. They try to frame the beginning of this issue as a newscast so that you're watching on a black and white TV or whatever. Something that we wouldn't do so much these days, but the way that it's framed looks really interesting at this point. And the Ox kind of comes back into it. We get Karen Page pining over Daredevil. They see all the fight and all that, and then she takes care of him and brings him back to the apartment. They're all going to be happy, him and Paige again. Fights the Ox, and he reverts back to his form. And then Karen Page is like, oh, I guess we shouldn't be together after all. I don't like this Daredevil thing. Goodbye, Matt. I love you. And that's the end of that. So all this drama just is like shoved aside, and she's like, oh, hey, Black Widow, you can have him now. So a very bizarre sort of ending, and again, just too contrived to really make an emotional impact, even though I like the developments of what's going on. It's just it didn't quite work out. And I spent a lot of time on this one, but there was a lot to discuss. So that's Daredevil Volume 4. Hope you enjoyed this. And that, for me, I've gotten all of the Daredevil epics except for 2 read, which are those Volumes 13 and 14, sort of orphaned ones in the middle there. So maybe I'll finish up with those shortly. I think I'll read Frank Miller next before I go on to those, who's not out in epic form, but out in omnibus at the moment. And yeah, this early Daredevil is a bit rough. It really is. I'd call this overall, there are parts I enjoyed, and I think Gene Colan's art's fine, but I still call it a 6 out of 10. It's just slightly below average, a little rough to get through, and there's not really a ton other than the Black Widow element to it that really made it through history. The rest of it is eminently forgettable. So that's it. Hit the like and subscribe button. We'll be back soon.